Hey guys, tonight we ease ourselves into the ancient world, specifically the dusty, bustling world of ancient Rome, and we're going to spend some time figuring out what your morning routine was like. Imagine stepping out of bed and facing the day in a time so different, yet strangely familiar. Let's peel back the layers of nearly 2 millennia and settle into the rhythm of a Roman morning. Get ready to feel the chill of the mosaic floor on your bare feet. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this without a serious case of morning grumbles. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Okay, so you're stirring. The first weak rays of dawn are just beginning to creep through the small, maybe unglazed, window high up on the wall, or perhaps filtering through a gap in the heavy curtains if you're in a slightly grander house. It's the prima lux, the first light. No annoying alarm clock here, just the natural rhythm of the sun, and maybe the less than gentle sounds of the city outside, starting to wake up, carts rumbling on the cobblestones, distant voices, the bleating of a sheep being herded somewhere you really hope it isn't about to be breakfast. The bed you're lying on, well, let's talk about that. Forget your memory foam mattress or even a sprung base. A typical Roman bed, a lectus, was essentially a wooden frame. On top of this frame was a base of woven straps or rope stretched taut. This webbing provided a minimal amount of give. It's like a very basic hammock stretched flat. Not exactly cloud nine. On top of the webbing, you'd have a mattress. And this mattress's comfort level depended entirely on your social standing and wealth. If you were poor, living in one of the crowded, multi-story apartment buildings called insulae, your mattress might be stuffed with straw or reeds. Imagine trying to get comfortable when you're basically sleeping on dried grass. You'd wake up feeling rustic, to put it mildly, probably with bits of straw poking you in awkward places, like finding rogue popcorn kernels in your bed, but less tasty and more persistent. You'd probably shake it out every morning just to avoid developing strange mattress-shaped impressions on your back. If you were a bit better off, maybe a craftsman or a freedman with a modest house, you might have a mattress stuffed with wool. Better than straw, certainly softer and less pokey, but still not exactly luxurious by modern standards. Wool stuffing can get lumpy, and perhaps more importantly in Rome's climate, quite warm and potentially fragrant over time. Airing out your mattress was a necessary chore, not just something your parents nagged you about. Now, if you were wealthy, living in a sprawling domus, you could afford the ultimate in Roman bed luxury, a mattress stuffed with feathers. This was the Roman equivalent of a 5-star hotel bed. Soft, yielding, the height of comfort. Of course, feathers can also get compacted and need fluffing, but compared to straw or wool, it was pure bliss. Historians still argue whether Roman feather beds ever reached the extravagant puffiness depicted in some later art or writing, or if that was just artistic license exaggerating for effect. Was it truly like sinking into a cloud, or just less awful than straw? The debate continues in hushed tones in dusty archives, while you, in your simulated Roman existence, are just hoping for feathers. Your bedding would likely be simple woolen blankets or linen sheets. Wool for warmth, linen for coolness. No fancy duvets or elaborate bedspreads for your average Roman, though the very rich might have more decorative covers for show when the bed was used as a couch during dinner parties. Romans often reclined on beds to eat. The bed wasn't just for sleeping, you see. It was multi-purpose furniture. So, you might wake up in the same spot where your host entertained guests last night, perhaps still smelling faintly of last night's fish sauce or wine. Charming. Speaking of smell, you spent the entire night in this room, maybe with a few other family members or slaves, depending on your status and the size of your home. Air circulation wasn't always the best, especially in winter when you'd want to keep windows shut. The air in the room when you first wake up is, well, let's just say it's used. A bit stale. It makes you appreciate opening a modern window and getting a blast of fresh air, doesn't it? The Romans certainly appreciated fresh air too, when they could get it. As the light strengthens, you start to feel the need to move. Your body, perhaps a bit stiff from the rope webbing base, and whatever was inside your mattress protests slightly. No leisurely scrolling through your phone here to gently ease into consciousness. The day starts when the light is sufficient, or when duty calls. The bed itself is often placed in a small alcove or a designated bedroom, cubiculum. These rooms could be tiny, just big enough for the bed and maybe a small chest. Privacy, especially in insulae or more modest homes, might be limited. You might be sharing a room or even the bed itself with family members. The concept of having your own bedroom was often a luxury. So, your waking up isn't a solitary, peaceful affair. You're aware of others around you, their breathing, their movements. Even the way you lay in bed might have been different. Roman beds were often sized more for reclining than lying flat out head to toe like we typically do. This goes back to their use as couches. So you might be waking up slightly propped up by pillows or cushions, or curled slightly on your side. It's a functional piece of furniture first, a sleep aid second. Mainstream fact confirmed. Roman beds were indeed basic wooden frames with rope webbing and stuffed mattresses, varying in filling based on wealth. Quirky tidbit. Roman beds were often used as daybeds or couches for reclining, especially during meals. Scholarly debate phrase used. Historians still argue whether, as you lie there, slowly becoming more awake, you might hear the sounds of the household stirring if you're in a domus. Slaves would be starting their tasks, fetching water, lighting fires in the kitchen, sweeping courtyards. Even if you're in an insula, the building itself would be coming alive with the sounds of neighbors starting their day. No time to hit the snooze button that doesn't exist. The world is beginning its daily grind, and soon, you'll have to join it. Just rolling over might feel like an accomplishment in itself, especially if that straw is particularly pokey this morning. Okay, time to face the music. Or rather, the mosaic floor. Okay, you've successfully navigated the treacherous terrain of your Roman bed. Now comes the moment of truth. Putting your feet on the floor. If you're wealthy, that floor might be a cool mosaic, intricate patterns underfoot. If you're less fortunate, it's probably packed earth or simple stone flags. Either way, unless it's high summer, it's likely to be cold. No fluffy bedroom slippers waiting conveniently beside the bed. You just step out, maybe with a slight wince. Your immediate priority, as for most humans in most eras, involves basic bodily functions. There are no ensuite bathrooms in the vast majority of Roman homes. No flushing toilets just down the hall. So, what do? Well, it depends again on your living situation. If you're in a grand domus, you might have a private latrine. This would be a simple room with a bench that had holes in it, situated over a drain or cesspit. Water would be poured down the drain regularly, either from a nearby cistern or by slaves constantly running water. But even these private latrines weren't like modern ones. They weren't always flushed with clean water, and the smell, well, you can imagine. Still, having one within your own home was a significant luxury. It meant you didn't have to venture out in the dark or cold of the early morning. For the vast majority of Romans, especially those living in insulae, the situation was less convenient. There were often communal latrines on the ground floor of the apartment building, or sometimes even attached to shops. These were essentially benches with holes, lined up side by side over a running channel of water. Social, right? You could have a chat with your neighbors while doing your business. It's a level of multitasking we rarely achieve today. Forget doom scrolling on your phone. This was doom socializing with minimal privacy. Historians still argue whether people brought scrolls to read in these public or semi-public latrines, as depicted in some satirical writings. Were they catching up on philosophy, or just trying to avoid eye contact? But even communal latrines required you to leave your room, maybe walk down several flights of stairs if you lived higher up in the insula, and possibly wait in line. So, for the very first urgent need of the morning, many people used a chamber pot, a lasanum or matella. This pot would be kept in your room overnight, and the first task upon waking would be to empty it. If you lived in an apartment building, you might carry the chamber pot downstairs to the communal latrine to empty and rinse it. Or, if you were less considerate, and many Romans were, you might just toss the contents out the window into the street below. Yes, really. This is one of the reasons why walking in Roman streets, especially in the early morning before the street cleaners, if there were any, had been through, was a hazardous activity. You didn't just have to watch out for carts, you had to watch out for incoming deliveries. It's the original look before you leap scenario, but applied to walking out your front door. Imagine the splash damage. Probably wasn't great for pedestrian fashion either. Even if you had a private latrine or used a communal one, the method of wiping was different. No soft toilet paper here. Romans typically used a xylospongium, a sponge attached to a stick. This sponge was usually kept in a bucket of water, often with vinegar or brine added, supposedly for hygiene, though how hygienic this communal sponge stick really was is questionable. After use, you'd rinse it in the water bucket and leave it for the next person. Yes, it was shared. Makes you appreciate even the roughest modern toilet paper, doesn't it? The wealthy might have had their own sponges or used wool. Mainstream fact: Romans used chamber pots and communal latrines. Quirky tidbit: the xylospongium, a shared sponge on a stick, was a common wiping method. So, your first few minutes in Roman Rome involve navigating the cold floor, addressing immediate biological needs, and potentially dealing with a shared, slightly vinegary sponge on a stick. It's not exactly the spa experience. You're wide awake now, probably more from the mild shock of the cold floor and the thought of that sponge than from any natural energy. As the sun gets a little higher, but still early, the city outside becomes noisier. You hear vendors starting to set up, people shouting greetings or arguments, the general low hum of a large, waking metropolis. If you live near a temple, you might hear priests beginning their morning rituals. If you live near a barracks, you might hear the sound of soldiers drilling. Life is definitely not quiet for long. You've dealt with the most pressing matter. Now maybe you need a drink of water. Again, no tap water in your room. You or a slave would need to fetch water from a nearby public fountain, nymphaeum, or maybe from a cistern if your house had one. Fetching water was a constant task, a daily necessity that we completely take for granted. Imagine having to walk down the street with a heavy amphora or bucket just to get enough water for drinking, washing, and cooking for the day. It puts a whole new spin on staying hydrated. It was a physical chore that started early. So, you've survived stepping out of bed. You've addressed the call of nature, hopefully without contributing to street-level hazards, and you might have had your first gulp of water fetched from a public source. Your Roman morning is well underway, and you haven't even thought about breakfast yet. The day is just starting to unfold its layers, and the next involves making yourself look presentable, or at least Roman presentable. So you've braved the cold floor and dealt with the first necessities of the day. Now comes the attempt to feel somewhat clean. Forget jumping into a hot shower. Your Roman morning wash-up is a much simpler, colder affair. If you're lucky enough to have a private bath at home, a major luxury, usually only in the largest villas, you might have had slaves heat some water for you. But for the vast majority, it's just cold water from a basin. Remember that water you're or a slave just fetched from the public fountain. That's what you're using. Bracing. You'd splash water on your face and hands. Maybe rinse your mouth out. This isn't a full bath, not even close. Think of it more like a quick refresh. You're just washing away the sleep and the night's grime from the most exposed parts. This morning routine is about presenting yourself cleanly to the world, not necessarily achieving deep, penetrating cleanliness as we understand it. Crucially, Romans didn't have soap as we know it, those bubbly bars made from fat and lye. Instead, they primarily used olive oil for cleaning. Yes, oil. The idea was that you'd rub oil onto your skin. This oil would mix with sweat, dirt, and dead skin cells. Then, you'd use a tool called a strigil, a curved metal scraper, to literally scrape the mixture off your skin. Imagine scraping warm oil and gunk off your body. It sounds efficient, perhaps, but not exactly pampering. It was like a built-in exfoliation routine, whether you wanted it or not. You'd rub the oil onto the parts of your body you wanted to clean: face, arms, legs. Then, scrape. You'd do this over a basin or a mat to catch the residue. It removed the surface dirt and left a layer of oil behind, which might have helped keep the skin supple, though it also meant you probably felt perpetually slightly oily. It's the ancient equivalent of a deeply moisturizing routine, minus the pleasant scents and quick absorption. You might smell faintly of olive oil all day, which honestly might be an improvement over some of the other Roman city smells we'll encounter later. This oil and strigil method was the standard for daily cleaning, and it was also done at the public baths, often by slaves or bathhouse attendants. It was such a common practice that used oil and scrapings from the public baths were sometimes collected and sold, believe it or not, as a form of ancient cosmetic or medicine. That's a quirky tidbit for you. People bought tubs of used bath gunk. Talk about recycling, though one wonders about the hygiene standards there. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why the average Roman life expectancy wasn't quite what we enjoy today. A full bath, soaking in warm water, usually happened later in the day, typically in the afternoon at the public baths, thermae or balnei. The public baths were a huge part of Roman social life, a place to exercise, socialize, read, relax, and get truly clean by their standards. Morning baths at home were rare and a sign of immense wealth or ill health. So, your morning wash-up is just the quick face/hand splash and maybe a bit of oil and scraping if you're feeling ambitious or particularly dirty from sleeping. Even dental hygiene was different. No fluoride toothpaste. Romans used various concoctions to clean their teeth and freshen breath. Some recipes involved things like crushed minerals, ground animal bones, or even urine. Yes, urine was believed to have whitening properties due to its ammonia content. Don't ask. They might use twigs or rough cloths to rub on their teeth. Bad breath was certainly a concern, and they tried their best with the available materials, though perhaps not with results we'd find dazzlingly fresh. Mainstream fact: Romans did not use soap as we know it, but relied on oil and strigils for cleaning. Quirky tidbit: used bath scrapings were sometimes sold as cosmetics. Historians still argue whether the average Roman was generally cleaner or dirtier than their contemporaries in other civilizations. Some point to the elaborate public baths as proof of a high standard of hygiene, while others highlight the lack of soap and reliance on methods like the shared sponge on a stick as indicators that their concept of cleanliness was simply different, not necessarily superior. Were they meticulous about body odor by their standards, or did everyone just subtly smell of olive oil and other things? So, after your quick splash of cold water, perhaps a bit of oil scraping magic, and an attempt to freshen your mouth with some questionable ingredients, you are as clean as you're going to be for the start of the day. You've shaken the straw out of your hair, hopefully, rinsed the sleep from your eyes, and are no longer actively contributing to street-level hazards. You smell vaguely of yesterday, fresh water, and whatever oil or mouthwash you used, ready to face the world after a bit of fine-tuning. Because now it's time to make yourself presentable, which involves hair, and maybe for some, a touch of Roman makeup. Alright, you've gone through the bracing cold water splash and perhaps the slightly unnerving oil and strigil routine. Now let's talk about grooming. How do you deal with your hair and face in ancient Rome? Again, this varies wildly depending on whether you're a man or a woman and your social status. For men, the most important grooming ritual was shaving. In the earlier republic, many Romans wore beards. But by the Empire period, a clean-shaven face became the fashion, largely influenced by figures like Scipio Africanus and later the clean-shaven look of emperors like Augustus. So, if you're a man in Imperial Rome, you're likely aiming for a smooth face. How do you shave? With a bronze or iron razor. These razors were sharp, but not like modern steel blades. They needed frequent sharpening, often on a stone, and they were tricky to use. Shaving yourself with one of these required a steady hand, good light, and a tolerance for nicks and cuts. It was a bit like trying to shave with a sharpened spoon. Imagine the potential for disaster, especially first thing in the morning before you've had your morning. Well, whatever the Roman equivalent of coffee was, more on that later. For most men, shaving was not a DIY job, at least not daily. You'd go to the tonsure, the barber. The barber shop was a social hub, a place to get your shave, catch up on gossip, and discuss the news. The barber would use hot towels and oils to soften the beard, then apply the razor with varying degrees of skill. A bad barber could leave you looking like you'd been in a fight with a small, angry badger. A good shave from a skilled tonsure was worth paying for. Getting your first shave was a rite of passage for young Roman men, often marked with a ceremony where the first clippings were dedicated to a god. Mainstream fact: Roman men were usually clean-shaven by the imperial period and often went to barbers. Hair styling for men was generally simple. Short and neat was the preferred style, mimicking the emperors. You might use a comb and perhaps a bit of oil to keep it in place. No elaborate gels or sprays, just natural hold, possibly enhanced by olive oil because apparently olive oil was the answer to everything in Rome. Haircuts were also done by the barber. For women, hair was much more elaborate. Styles changed over time, from simple buns in the Republic to incredibly complex structures of curls, braids, and sometimes even hairpieces and wigs in the imperial period. Wealthy women would have had slaves specifically trained as hairdressers, ornatrices, who would spend a significant part of the morning working on their mistress's hair. This involved curling irons, heated metal rods, pins, nets, and ribbons. Getting a fashionable Roman hairstyle could take hours. Imagine sitting still for that long every morning. It makes your modern 5-minute messy bun feel incredibly efficient. Women also engaged in facial grooming. Tweezers were used to remove unwanted hair, often made of bronze. Eyebrows were sometimes plucked or shaped. And yes, Roman women used cosmetics, though not universally, and the degree varied with social class and the woman's own preference. The goal of Roman makeup was generally to achieve a pale complexion, a sign of not having to work in the sun. Rosy cheeks and lips, and accentuated eyes. They used white lead or chalk to whiten the face. White lead was effective but toxic, so perhaps another reason for shorter lifespans. Cheek and lip color came from red ochre or plant dyes. Eyes were lined with kohl, usually made from antimony or soot, to make them stand out. They might use crushed ants or other surprising ingredients for eyebrow tinting. A quirky tidbit: Romans used lead-based makeup for skin whitening, which was highly toxic. Definitely don't try that at home. Perfumes and oils were also used by both men and women, often applied after the wash-up. These would be oils infused with scents from flowers, herbs, or spices. They helped mask other less pleasant odors, both personal and environmental. So, your grooming routine depends heavily on your gender and bank account. If you're a man, you're probably heading to the barber or risking life and limb with a bronze razor. If you're a wealthy woman, you're settling in for a long session with your ornatrix and maybe a touch of toxic lead powder. If you're poor, grooming is probably minimal, a quick comb through, maybe some oil if you can spare it. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of cosmetics, especially lead-based ones, significantly impacted the health of Roman women. While lead poisoning is well documented today, assessing its long-term effects in ancient populations based on skeletal remains can be challenging, and distinguishing cosmetic use from medicinal use, lead was also used in some Roman medicines, adds another layer of complexity. Was Roman beauty literally deadly? By the time you're groomed to the Roman standard, whether clean-shaven, elaborately coiffed, or just tidied up, a significant chunk of the early morning is gone. You've survived the bed, the facilities, the chilly wash-up, and the potential hazards of ancient razors or toxic face paint. Now that you look the part, more or less, maybe it's time to think about putting something inside the part you just cleaned. Yes, breakfast. Alright, you're washed, groomed, and perhaps feeling a little peckish after all that effort avoiding ancient razor cuts and toxic powders. What's for breakfast in ancient Rome? Brace yourself. It's probably not the feast you might imagine. For the average Roman, the first meal of the day, called the ientaculum, was typically very light and simple. Forget pancakes, bacon, or a full English fry-up. That level of culinary enthusiasm was reserved for later in the day. The most common breakfast consisted of bread. And not the soft, fluffy white bread you might buy today. That kind of bread existed and was preferred by the wealthy, but it was a luxury. The everyday bread was usually a coarser loaf, often made from emmer wheat. Could be quite dense and hard, especially if it was a day or two old. Stale bread was a fact of life. How did you make stale bread more palatable? You might dip it in water or wine to soften it. Or more commonly, you might dip it in olive oil. Yes, more olive oil. It seems the Roman solution to everything from cleaning to breakfast was just add oil. Dipping bread in oil was a simple, energy-rich way to start the day. It's the ancient Roman equivalent of toast with butter, minus the toasting and the butter. Alongside the bread, you might have a few other simple items depending on what was available and affordable. This could include olives, makes sense with the oil, right? Dates, figs, or other fruits in season. Sometimes cheese was eaten with bread. If you were slightly better off, you might have some leftovers from the previous day's meal, but a specifically prepared hot breakfast was uncommon. Think of it less as a meal and more as a quick bite to break the fast. You're just putting a little something in your stomach to give you energy for the morning's tasks. It wasn't a family sit-down affair like dinner, Sina. People ate their ientaculum individually, often standing up quickly before heading out. What about something to drink? Water was always an option, fetched from the fountain as we discussed. Wine, often diluted with water, was also commonly drunk, even in the morning, as pure water sources could sometimes be unreliable. The alcohol content in diluted wine was low, so it was more like a safe, slightly flavored drink than a way to get tipsy before work. If you were wealthy, your ientaculum might be slightly more varied, perhaps including eggs, honey, or milk, in addition to fine bread dipped in fragrant olive oil. But even for the rich, it was still a relatively small meal compared to their lavish dinners. Children, laborers, and slaves might have had an even simpler breakfast, perhaps just a piece of bread or a porridge made from grains. Fueling up for hard work didn't necessarily involve a diverse menu. There's a quirky tidbit about Roman breakfast. A popular breakfast dish was called meridum, which was a kind of cheese spread made with garlic, herbs, and cheese, mashed together and eaten with bread. So, garlic bread for breakfast? Sure, why not? Perhaps helps keep vampires away, or maybe just other people in the morning crowd. Imagine everyone in the forum with garlic breath. Peak Roman social experience. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of the ientaculum was purely a matter of practicality and economics, or if it also reflected a cultural view that eating heavily in the morning was unnecessary or even unhealthy. Was it simply a habit born of busy lives, or a conscious dietary choice? The Roman diet shifted significantly throughout the day, with the main meal being the elaborate cena in the afternoon or evening. So, you've grabbed a piece of bread, maybe dipped it in oil or munched on a few olives. Washed it down with water or diluted wine. Your stomach isn't full, but you've put something in it. You're not exactly feeling energized by a balanced meal, but you have enough to get going. No morning coffee ritual to savor, just sustenance. It's a practical, no-nonsense start to the day, fitting for a culture focused on public life and work during the morning hours. Now that you've fueled up, minimally, it's time to think about the people who might be helping you navigate this morning routine. The household slaves. Alright, you've had your bit of bread and maybe some olives, washing it down with water or watered wine. But let's be honest, for many Romans, especially those with any kind of status, this little morning routine didn't happen by magic. It required help. Specifically, it required the help of slaves. Slavery was absolutely fundamental to Roman society at every level, and your morning was no exception. If you're in a wealthier household, a domus, you are surrounded by slaves whose day started long before yours. They would have been up before the first light, prima lux, in the darkest hours of the ante-lucem. Why so early? To get the house ready for the master and mistress to wake up. Imagine having to wake up not just before your alarm, but before the sun, because someone else needs their house to be ready for them to wake up. That's dedication, or more accurately, forced labor. Their first tasks were essential for making the household function. Remember needing water for washing or drinking. Slaves were the ones who would have gone to the public fountain, likely in the still dark streets, carrying heavy buckets or amphorae to fill the household cisterns or storage jars. This wasn't a one-time job. Depending on the household size, it could be a constant back and forth throughout the morning. They'd also be starting the fires in the kitchen hearth, maybe small braziers in rooms that needed warming, or potentially heating water if the house had a rudimentary heating system. Though complex heating was rare outside of public baths or the most luxurious villas. Slaves were integral to your grooming routine too. If you were a wealthy woman, your ornatrix, the slave specializing in hairstyling, would be ready with curling irons heated over coals. Carefully, you hope, and a bewildering array of pins and hairpieces. If you were a man, a slave might assist you with your own shaving, holding the mirror or applying oils, or you might have a slave who was a skilled barber himself. They weren't just tools, they were specialized labor with different slaves trained for different tasks. Cooking, cleaning, weaving, teaching children, managing accounts, and yes, personal attendance. Preparing that simple ientaculum also fell to the slaves. While the meal itself was basic, someone had to grind the grain for the bread, if baked at home, though often bought, prepare the olives or fruit, fetch the wine. For wealthier households, this might involve a dedicated kitchen staff, but even a modest household with only a few slaves would rely on them for basic food preparation. Cleaning the house was another early morning duty. Sweeping floors, tidying rooms, emptying chamber pots. Ugh, remember the chamber pots? Yeah, definitely a slave's job to dispose of that, and airing out rooms where possible. They were the unseen gears turning the Roman domestic machine. The sheer number of slaves in Rome was staggering. Estimates vary, but in the imperial period, slaves might have made up anywhere from 15 to 20% to perhaps even 30% or more of the total population of the city of Rome. Mainstream fact: slavery was widespread and fundamental to the Roman economy and daily life, with household slaves performing numerous essential tasks. A wealthy family could own hundreds or even thousands of slaves, though a more typical middle-class family might have just a few. Even people of modest means might own one or two. Their living conditions were usually simple. Household slaves often slept in small rooms or cubicles near their work areas, or even on mats on the floor in hallways or courtyards. Privacy was minimal to non-existent. Their lives were dictated by the needs and schedules of their owners, from the moment they woke up before dawn until they went to sleep after the household had retired. While slaves were legally property and could be bought, sold, or punished, the relationship between household slaves and their owners could be complex. Some owners were brutal, others might treat long-serving or trusted slaves almost like members of the extended household. House slaves, particularly those with specialized skills or those who served the family directly, sometimes had better living conditions or opportunities than slaves forced to work in mines or on large agricultural estates. Some could even save up money, a peculium, to potentially buy their freedom, becoming freedmen and women who still retained certain obligations to their former masters. A quirky tidbit: there were even slaves whose job was specifically to carry their masters in a litter, lectica, through the streets. Imagine being someone's personal human sedan chair. Definitely beats walking, though probably not the best job in the Roman heat or the chaotic traffic. That sounds like a workout regime you didn't sign up for. Oh, your morning commute is 3 miles? Mine involves carrying a 200-pound senator on my back. Historians still argue about the extent to which household slaves developed their own subcultures or social networks within the sprawling slave population of Rome. Were they able to form strong bonds and support systems despite their difficult circumstances, or were they too isolated within individual households to create a unified slave community? The evidence, often coming from owner perspectives or legal texts, makes it hard to fully grasp the slave's own lived experiences and social structures. So, as you finish your meager breakfast and prepare for the next stage of your Roman day, remember that much of the initial work, the fetching, the heating, the tidying, the assistance with dressing and grooming, has been done by people whose day began much earlier and with far fewer comforts than your own. They are the silent backbone of the Roman morning, working in the background to ensure the free citizens can proceed with their daily rituals, particularly the important one coming up: meeting with clients or patrons. Okay, you've eaten your bread and olives, had your questionable morning wash, and hopefully avoided any major shaving mishaps or lead-based cosmetic incidents. Now, especially if you are a free Roman man of any status, a crucial part of your morning begins: the salutatio. This was the formal morning call, a ritual of greeting and acknowledging social hierarchies that was absolutely central to Roman public life. If you are a patronus, a patron, you will be staying home to receive your clients. If you are a client, you will be heading out to visit your patrons. This relationship was one of mutual obligation and dependence that permeated Roman society. As a patron, your salutatio would begin fairly early, usually shortly after dawn. You would position yourself in a suitable part of your house, often the atrium, the main reception hall, or maybe a specific room designated for this purpose. Slaves would be on hand to manage the flow of visitors and perhaps offer minor refreshments, though the salutatio was generally a quick, formal affair. Your clients would arrive, ranging from people of lower social status to freedmen who were formerly your slaves, to even people of similar status but perhaps less wealth or influence who sought your support. They would approach you, offer a formal greeting, maybe ask after your health, and generally show respect and deference. What did the client get out of this? Protection, support, and sometimes tangible benefits. A patron might provide legal assistance, financial aid like the sportula, a small handout of food or money, help with finding work or connections for advancing their career. It was a form of social safety net and political networking rolled into one. What did the patron get? Prestige, influence, and political power. A large number of clients showing up for your salutatio was a public display of your importance. It meant you had a network of people beholden to you, who could be called upon for support in elections, public assemblies, or simply to make your retinue look impressive when you walk through the forum. More clients meant more status. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of having a huge number of followers on social media, but instead of likes and comments, you got actual political clout and people showing up at your house at the crack of dawn. As a client, your morning involved visiting your patron or multiple patrons if you had them. You'd arrive at their house, probably wait in a queue with other clients, and then perform your brief, formal greeting. It wasn't a leisurely chat. It was a quick check-in, a reaffirmation of the relationship. Imagine speed dating, but for social and economic survival. You'd have to manage your time carefully if you had several patrons to visit before the main business of the day began. The salutatio was a fascinating daily dance of power and dependence. It reinforced social hierarchies and solidified political alliances. It wasn't necessarily warm and fuzzy. It was a formal duty. For the client, it could be humbling, but necessary for getting by. For the patron, it was part of the performance of power. Mainstream fact: the salutatio was a morning ritual where clients visited their patrons to show respect and seek support. This ritual highlights how interconnected Roman society was and how personal relationships, particularly those based on patronage, were crucial for navigating the system. Forget applying for grants or networking events. In Rome, your morning handshake could determine your livelihood. There's a quirky tidbit about the salutatio. Clients were expected to wear a toga, even if they weren't citizens or didn't normally wear one. The toga was the formal garment of a Roman citizen, and wearing it for the salutatio was a sign of respect for the patron and participation in Roman civic life. Imagine having to put on a bulky, impractical sheet every morning just to say hello to your boss's ancient equivalent. Talk about a dress code. Historians still argue about the true nature of the patron-client relationship. Was it primarily a mutually beneficial arrangement, or was it often exploitative, with powerful patrons taking advantage of their dependent clients? The reality likely varied widely depending on the individuals involved and the specific circumstances. Was it a system that fostered community, or one that simply entrenched inequality? So, whether you were sitting in your atrium receiving a line of toga-clad visitors or standing in that line yourself, the salutatio was a fundamental part of your Roman morning. It dictated where you needed to be and who you needed to see right after getting up and briefly grooming. Once this ritual was complete, usually by the mid-morning, Romans would then move on to other activities. But first, you need to actually get properly dressed. Because yes, the toga is coming, right? The sun is climbing a little higher now. You've done your quick wash-up, maybe choked down some bread, and if you're part of the patronage system, you've either received or paid your morning calls. Now it's time to get properly dressed for the Roman day ahead. And depending on who you are, this could be a simple affair or a major production. For pretty much everyone in Rome, the basic garment worn next to the skin was the tunic. Think of it as a simple t-shirt dress or a long shirt. It was usually made of wool or linen. For men, the tunic typically reached to the knees. For women, it was longer, reaching to the ankles. Slaves also wore tunics, often of coarser material and sometimes shorter. The color and decoration of your tunic could indicate your status. Most people wore the natural off-white or cream color of the wool or linen. Senators and high-ranking magistrates wore tunics with broad purple stripes, latus clavis, running vertically from the shoulder. Knights, the equites, wore tunics with narrower purple stripes, angustus clavis. This simple difference in stripe width immediately told everyone who you were. Imagine if your job title was just printed on your shirt in purple stripes. Very efficient. Oh, look, there goes a senior manager. And there's a middle manager. So, you pull on your tunic. Simple, easy to get on. Comfortable enough for the Roman climate, which could range from quite warm in summer to chilly in winter. But for a free Roman citizen man, especially if you were heading out for any kind of public appearance or business, the tunic wasn't enough. Oh no, you needed the toga. The toga, the iconic symbol of Roman citizenship. It was essentially a large, semicircular piece of woolen cloth, incredibly heavy and cumbersome. Putting on a toga was a feat in itself. It wasn't like slipping on a jacket. It involved careful draping and folding, tucking one end in, sweeping it around your body, over one shoulder, and letting the rest hang in elegant or awkward, if you did it wrong, folds. It required practice and often the help of a slave known as a vestipica, specifically trained in the art of toga folding and arrangement. Trying to get that bulky wool just right, especially first thing in the morning, sounds like a recipe for frustration. Imagine wrestling with a large wool blanket that insists on falling off your shoulder while trying to look dignified. It's the original fashion nightmare. The most formal toga was the toga virilis or toga pura, the plain, undyed off-white woolen toga worn by adult male citizens. Magistrates wore the toga praetexta, which had a purple border. Candidates for office wore the toga candida, especially whitened toga. Wearing a toga in public was a sign of your status as a citizen, something slaves and foreigners were generally not allowed to do. It was heavy, hot in summer, and impractical, but it was essential for formal occasions, appearances in the forum, or meeting with higher status individuals. Mainstream fact: the toga was a heavy, draped garment worn by Roman male citizens for public occasions, signifying their status. Most Romans probably didn't wear the full, elaborate toga all the time they were outside, despite what some artwork might suggest. For more casual outings, or if they weren't citizens or were simply working people, a tunic might suffice, perhaps with a cloak or mantle, pallium or lacerna, worn over it in cooler weather. But if you were a citizen wanting to be seen and respected in public, the toga was often necessary for at least part of the morning. For Roman women, the main garment over the tunic was the stola. This was a long, sleeveless dress, often made of finer fabric and sometimes dyed in vibrant colors. It was worn over the long tunic. Freeborn Roman women who were married and respectable were expected to wear the stola in public. Over the stola, a woman might wear a palla, a large rectangular shawl or cloak that could be draped in various ways around the body and head, especially when going outdoors. Like the male tunic, the stola and palla could vary in material and decoration based on wealth. Prostitutes and women considered disreputable were not allowed to wear the stola. Another example of clothing enforcing social norms. Children wore tunics. Young boys wore the toga praetexta with the purple border until they came of age, usually around 14 to 16, when they would ceremonially adopt the plain toga virilis. Girls also wore tunics, sometimes with the purple border, until they married. Now for your feet. What do you put on your feet? Sandals, solii, were the most common footwear, worn indoors and often outside in good weather. These were typically simple leather soles attached to the foot with straps. For walking outdoors, especially in the potentially messy streets, you might wear sturdier sandals or even enclosed shoes or boots, calcii or calligi. Roman soldiers famously wore heavy, hobnailed boots called calligi, designed for marching. The type of footwear could also indicate status or profession. Senators had special sandals. Putting on your sandals or boots is the final step before leaving your dwelling. No need to worry about matching socks. That wasn't really a thing. You just strap on your leather soles. If it's chilly, maybe you wrap your feet in cloth strips before putting on boots. But the concept of socks as we know them is largely absent. A quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes removed their sandals when reclining to eat, just like we might kick off our shoes at home. Slaves attending dinners would manage guests' sandals. Imagine the potential mix-ups at the end of a large dinner party. Excuse me, I believe you have my soli, mine have the slightly smaller toe loop. Historians still argue about the practicality and widespread daily use of the toga by average Roman citizens, especially working men. Was it genuinely worn routinely for most of the morning out in the city, or was it mostly reserved for specific formal occasions, with simpler cloaks being more common everyday outerwear? The evidence from literature and art can sometimes seem contradictory, leading to ongoing debate about the true fashion reality on the Roman street. So you are dressed, tunic on. If you're a citizen man heading out formally, you've wrestled with and successfully draped your heavy woolen toga, perhaps with the help of a very patient slave. If you're a respectable woman, you're in your stola and palla. Feet are sandaled or booted. You look like a Roman. Now, it's time to open the door and step out into the cacophony that is the Roman street in the morning. Okay, you're dressed. Tunic on, maybe wrestling with that cumbersome toga, or adjusting your stola and palla. Feet are shod in sandals or sturdier boots. You've survived the straw mattress, the chamber pot dilemma, the bracing cold wash, and the potential dangers of bronze razors and lead makeup. You've had your meager breakfast and perhaps navigated the salutatio ritual. Now you stand at the threshold of your home, ready to step out. Opening the front door in Roman Rome is not like stepping onto a quiet suburban street. Unless you live in a very large, secluded villa, which most Romans didn't. You are immediately assaulted by the sounds, smells, and sights of a densely populated, incredibly lively ancient city waking up. It's a sensory overload compared to the relative quiet of your home. First, the sounds. The rumble of cart wheels on cobblestone streets. Many streets were paved, but the carts were often iron-shod and noisy. People shouting of vendors hawking their wares, neighbors greeting each other, arguments breaking out, possibly the distant sounds of construction or repairs. Animals, donkeys or mules pulling carts, stray dogs barking, maybe the bleating of those unfortunate sheep we heard earlier. The general hubbub of thousands, perhaps millions, of people going about their business. It's a constant, loud soundtrack. No noise-canceling headphones here. You just had to get used to it. Then the smells. Roman smells. Complex bouquet. There would be the smell of wood smoke from morning fires being lit. The smell of baking bread from the bakeries. The smell of cooking food from street stalls and taverns already preparing food. But also, the less pleasant smells. Open drains and sewers. Rome had sewers, but they weren't sealed systems everywhere. Animal waste, remember those? Donkeys. The aforementioned chamber pot contents tossed out of windows, hopefully not landing too near you. Unwashed bodies. Tanneries and other workshops that produced strong odors. Could be pungent. You'd definitely develop a strong sense of smell just trying to identify what olfactory assault was hitting you next. It makes you appreciate modern waste disposal and sanitation systems, even the slightly whiffy bins on collection day. The sights are just as overwhelming. Crowds. Even relatively early in the morning, the streets are filling up with people. Slaves running errands, workmen heading to construction sites, vendors pushing carts, citizens heading to the forum or their morning appointments. The streets were often narrow, especially in the older parts of the city or between tall insulae. Sunlight might struggle to reach the bottom in places. Buildings would be packed together, shops opening up at street level, apartment windows high above. Signage for shops and taverns, sometimes brightly painted, would hang out over the street. Graffiti was common, everywhere from political slogans to personal messages and rude drawings. Walking out your front door means immediately entering this chaotic, vibrant, sometimes hazardous environment. There's no easing into it. You are plunged straight into the thick of Roman life. If you were used to it, maybe it just felt like home. If you were new, it could be quite a shock. Think about the contrast between the relatively quiet, contained space of your home and the explosion of activity and sensation outside. It's a stark transition, the boundary between the private and public spheres. And for Romans, the public sphere was hugely important. Much of daily life happened outside the home: work, socializing, politics, entertainment. So stepping out was stepping into the core of their world. Mainstream fact: Roman streets were typically very noisy, crowded, and often smelled strongly due to a combination of cooking, animals, and less than perfect sanitation. A quirky tidbit: Roman streets had a lot of graffiti, serving as an ancient form of public communication and expression. Think of it as the original comment section, but written on walls. Historians still argue whether Roman cities were truly as dirty and smelly as ancient writers sometimes imply, or if those descriptions were exaggerated for literary effect. While there's no doubt sanitation was not what we'd consider modern, Rome did have impressive aqueducts bringing in fresh water and large-scale sewers like the Cloaca Maxima. The reality was likely a mixed bag. Areas served by good infrastructure might be relatively cleaner, while others remained quite foul. Was Rome a constantly stinking metropolis, or did pockets of relative cleanliness exist? So, take a deep breath, maybe through your mouth to be safe, and step out. The door closes behind you, shutting off the minimal piece of your dwelling. You are now officially immersed in the Roman morning rush hour. And now you need to get to wherever you're going. Time for the morning commute, ancient style. All right, you've taken that bracing step out of your doorway and into the glorious sensory chaos of the Roman morning street. The noise, the smells, the crowds, it's all part of the backdrop now as you begin your morning commute. And how do you get around? Well, for most Romans, the answer is simple: you walk. Walking was the primary mode of transport for the vast majority of people in Rome. The distances within the city weren't always huge, and for daily errands or visits, putting one foot in front of the other was the most practical way to get from A to B. Remember those sturdy sandals or boots you put on? This is why. You're going to be using them a lot. Navigating the streets on foot was an experience. As we discussed, they were crowded. You'd be constantly jostling for space with other pedestrians, slaves carrying burdens, children running about, and potentially stray animals. The streets weren't always smooth either. While main roads were paved with cobblestones, smaller lanes could be uneven, muddy, or dusty depending on the weather. Plus, you had to watch out for those open drains or discarded chamber pot contents. It required paying attention. No leisurely stroll while staring at a scroll here, even if historians debate whether they read in latrines, definitely not while walking the streets. During the day, wheel traffic was often restricted within the city, especially heavy carts. Julius Caesar famously enacted laws restricting cart traffic to nighttime hours to reduce congestion during the day. So while you'd hear the carts rumbling in the early morning dark, the main daytime commute was dominated by pedestrians. This made walking essential, but also meant the streets were slightly less dangerous during daylight hours than they would have been with constant cart traffic. If you were wealthy or important, you might avoid the pedestrian scrum by being carried in a litter lectica. Remember that quirky tidbit about slaves whose job was to carry people? This is where they came in. A litter was essentially a covered couch or seat mounted on poles, carried by anywhere from 2 to 8 slaves, lecticarii, depending on the weight of the occupant and the impressiveness of the display. Being carried in a litter was a status symbol, allowing you to glide above the pedestrian crowds, relatively comfortably and certainly dry if it was raining. It's the ancient Roman equivalent of being chauffeured in a sedan chair, complete with built-in human suspension. Imagine you're a wealthy patron heading to the forum. You're sitting in your litter, perhaps dictating letters to a slave or reading a scroll, while your lecticarii navigate the narrow, crowded streets, parting the sea of lesser mortals on foot. Clients might even accompany the litter, walking alongside their patron as part of his retinue. It was mobile power display and commuting efficiency rolled into one. Of course, not everyone could afford a litter or the slaves to carry it. For most, it was walking. Fast walking, slow walking, squeezing past people, stepping over obstacles. It was a workout just getting to your destination. Distances could still be significant. Rome was a large city, covering a considerable area within its walls. Walking from one end to the other could take a substantial amount of time. This limited how many places you could realistically visit in a morning. You'd probably plan your route to hit multiple locations if necessary. Maybe the forum, then a quick stop at a shop, then off to a meeting all on foot. Mainstream fact: walking was the primary means of transport for most Romans within the city, often through crowded and potentially messy streets. Quirky tidbit: wealthy Romans could be carried in litters by slaves to avoid walking and display their status. Historians still argue about the actual speeds at which people moved through Roman cities and how much distance the average person covered daily. While estimates can be made based on maps and ancient descriptions, factoring in congestion, street obstacles, and the practicalities of Roman footwear makes it difficult to precisely calculate the average Roman stride and daily step count. Were Romans generally fitter than us due to all the walking, or were they constantly exhausted from navigating the urban jungle? So, you are now part of the flow. Whether you're striding purposefully through the crowds in your sturdy boots or being gently, hopefully, swayed along in a litter carried by slaves, your Roman morning commute is in full swing. You're heading out into the heart of the city, where business, politics, and social life really happen. And for many, a necessary stop along the way, or maybe even the destination itself for a quick social break, involves a visit to the public latrine. Yes, we're revisiting that topic because it wasn't just a private morning necessity. Okay, you're on your morning commute, navigating the noisy, crowded Roman streets. Whether you're walking or being carried in a litter, you're making your way towards your destination. And for many Romans, a detour or a planned stop might involve a visit to the public latrines. Yes, we talked about them for your first morning necessity back at home, but public latrines were much more than just facilities. They were social spaces. Imagine a room, often quite large and sometimes even ornately decorated with mosaics and statues, featuring a long bench with maybe 20, 30, or even more holes cut into it. This bench would be situated over a channel of running water that carried the waste away into the main sewer system. There were no stalls, no dividers between the seats. You sat shoulder to shoulder with other people. This lack of privacy, which seems completely alien to us, meant the public latrine was a place to socialize. People would sit there, chat with their friends or acquaintances, discuss the latest gossip, talk politics, or arrange business deals. It was a casual meeting place, often quite lively. Imagine having a business meeting while, well, you get the picture. It certainly puts a new spin on doing business. Philosophers are said to have held discussions there. People exchanged news. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of the water cooler chat, except the water was literally running beneath your feet, carrying away waste. It makes you wonder about the acoustics. Were you shouting over the sound of running water and other noises? Probably required a certain level of confidence, or perhaps just a complete lack of self-consciousness to conduct important conversations there. Access to public latrines was widespread in Rome. While not every street corner had one, they were located throughout the city, often near the forum, markets, baths, or other public buildings. Some were free to use, others might charge a small fee. They were an essential part of Roman urban infrastructure, dealing with the waste of a large population that mostly lived in homes without private facilities. Remember the xylospongium, the shared sponge on a stick, from our earlier discussion? This is where it would be used in the public latrines. Buckets of water, often with added salt or vinegar, would be strategically placed for rinsing the communal sponge. Again, the hygiene standards are debatable by modern sensibilities. While the running water beneath the seats was a clever piece of engineering for waste disposal, the personal cleaning method leaves a lot to be desired. Mainstream fact: public latrines in Rome were communal spaces with multiple seats over running water, often used for socializing. Quirky tidbit: despite the lack of privacy, they were common places for conversation and even business discussions. Wealthier Romans who had private latrines at home might still use the public ones when they were out and about, as it was often more convenient than rushing all the way home. Plus, it was a place to see and be seen, to participate in the public life of the city. even in such an unusual setting. Historians still argue about the extent to which disease spread in Roman cities and whether their sanitation systems, including the public latrines and sewers, were effective enough to prevent outbreaks given the population density and lack of germ theory. While the aqueducts and sewers were impressive engineering feats, were they truly sufficient to maintain public health in such a crowded environment, especially with practices like the shared sponge? Or were Roman cities perpetually on the brink of epidemic? So, whether you needed to go or just wanted to catch up on the latest gossip, a stop at the public latrine might have been part of your Roman morning commute. It was a casual, if somewhat unglamorous, part of the social landscape. Having taken care of business in more ways than one, you're now ready to head to your actual destination for the day's work or activities. Okay, you've navigated the noisy, crowded streets, perhaps made a quick, social stop at the public latrines. Hopefully you didn't try to finalize a major business deal right there, and now you're arriving at your workplace. For most Romans, the morning was the busiest and most important part of the working day. The heat of the afternoon, especially in summer, made strenuous activity less appealing, and the main meal, the cena, happened later. So, work started relatively early and often finished by midday or soon after. If you were a craftsman or shopkeeper, your workplace was your taberna. These were small rooms or stalls, often opening directly onto the street, sometimes built into the ground floor of insulae. The morning would involve opening up your taberna, perhaps taking down wooden shutters that secured the front overnight, setting up your tools or displays, and getting ready for customers. The street outside your taberna would be filling up with fellow shopkeepers doing the same, creating a lively, noisy scene. You'd hear the clanging of the blacksmith next door, the chatter from the bakery across the street, the calls of vendors selling produce from baskets. What kind of work were people doing? Almost everything you can imagine. Bakers were firing up their ovens, the smell of fresh bread starting to mingle with the street smells. Potters were setting up their wheels. Metal workers were hammering away. Textile workers were spinning and weaving. Scribes were getting out their papyrus and ink to write letters or copy documents. Barbers, remember them? Were sharpening their razors, ready for the morning rush of clean-shaven hopefuls. It was a hive of activity, fueled by the morning light and the need to get things done before the heat set in. If you weren't a shopkeeper, you might be heading to a construction site. Rome was constantly building and rebuilding temples, public buildings, aqueducts, baths, new insulae. This required a large workforce of laborers, stonecutters, masons, carpenters. Their day would start early, with physical work beginning as soon as there was enough light to see. Imagine the sounds of hammers, saws, and chisels echoing through the morning air. It was tough, manual labor, the kind that definitely made you appreciate that simple bread and olive breakfast. Others might be working in the markets, for Venalia, setting up stalls to sell everything from fish and meat to vegetables, fruits, and manufactured goods. Bargaining and trading would begin early, as people did their daily shopping. For those in administrative roles, perhaps working for a wealthy patron, the government, or in a public office, the morning involved heading to wherever that office was located. Maybe in the patron's house, the forum, or another public building. This could involve managing accounts, writing official documents, dealing with legal matters, or assisting magistrates. It was quieter work than the workshops or construction sites, but equally essential to the running of the city. Even education happened in the morning. Roman schools, ludi, typically started at dawn. Children would be learning reading, writing, and arithmetic, often in simple open-air spaces or rooms, enduring strict discipline and rote memorization. Imagine trying to concentrate on your Roman numerals with the sounds of the street just outside. Distracting, to say the least. Probably made you wish you were still in bed, wrestling with that straw mattress. The Roman workday, particularly for manual labor and public business, was heavily concentrated in the morning hours, roughly from sunrise until midday, meridies. After that, many people would break for their main meal, cena, and often head to the baths for relaxation and exercise, with less formal work or social engagements filling the afternoon. Mainstream fact: the Roman workday was typically concentrated in the morning hours, from dawn until around midday. There's a quirky tidbit about Roman work habits. There wasn't a strong distinction between work and life in the way we have today. Your taberna might be your workplace, but your family might live in rooms above or behind it. Public life and private life often bled into each other. And remember the salutatio? That was work for both the patron and the client, a necessary part of maintaining your social and economic position, and it happened right in your home or the patron's home. It wasn't just about producing goods or providing services. It was about participating in the daily rhythm and social structure of the city. Historians still argue about the exact number of hours the average Roman worked each day and how much leisure time they truly had. While some ancient writers complain about being overworked or mention public holidays, the reality for laborers and slaves was likely much more demanding and continuous than for the upper classes. Was Roman society truly built on the leisure of the few supported by the constant toil of the many, or were there more opportunities for rest and recreation across different social strata than we sometimes assume? So, as the morning progresses, you are fully immersed in your daily occupation, whatever it may be. The city is alive with activity, everyone contributing to the immense enterprise that was Rome. You are earning your living, participating in the economy, whether you're selling loaves of bread, carving stone, writing letters, or teaching kids their ABCs, or maybe their alpha, beta, gammas, depending on influence. The physical center of much of this activity, the beating heart of the city in the morning, was often the forum. You've reached your workplace, or perhaps you're on your way to the forum, navigating the crowds and the smells. But let's just pause for a moment and step back inside the home before the full rush of the public day consumes you. Because for many Romans, particularly the head of the household, the morning also involved a quiet, personal, but deeply important ritual, household worship. The Romans weren't just religious when they went to the big temples to sacrifice bulls or consult augurs about the flight of birds. Their religion was woven into the fabric of daily life, and the home was a key site for this. Every Roman household, from the grandest domus to the most humble apartment room, was intended to have a little shrine, a place dedicated to the gods who protected the home and the family. This shrine was called the lararium. The lararium wasn't usually a grand structure. It could be a niche in a wall, a small cupboard, or simply a painted area on the wall in the atrium, the main hall, or sometimes in the kitchen. On or in front of the lararium, there would be small statues or painted images of the household deities. The most important were the laras and the penates. The laras were protective spirits of the household and the family, sometimes thought of as the souls of ancestors who watched over the home. Imagine them as benevolent guardians, the spiritual equivalent of a watchful family dog, but less prone to barking at the mailman. The penates were the gods of the storehouse, associated with the family's prosperity and continuity, ensuring there was always food in the pantry. So, you're praying to the protectors of your family and your future food supply. Pretty practical gods, really. Beyond the laras and penates, each family worshipped its own specific set of deities that were important to them, perhaps gods associated with their trade or personal favorites. The head of the household, the paterfamilias, also had his own personal protective spirit, his genius. For women, the equivalent spirit was called the Juno. Worshipping the genius or Juno was about honoring the vital force and continuity of the family through its head. It's like saying a little prayer to the concept of dad's good luck or mom's resilience every morning. So, in the morning, usually the first thing after getting dressed but before leaving the house or receiving clients, the paterfamilias, or sometimes another family member, would approach the lararium. This was the moment for a quiet, personal interaction with the divine. The ritual would be simple but meaningful. Offerings would be made. These could be small things, a pinch of incense burned in a little dish, a small libation, a pouring out of wine or oil, or little bits of food from meals. Yes, a quirky tidbit. They would sometimes offer little pieces of bread, fruit, or even tiny cakes baked in the shape of the Lara's figures themselves. Imagine baking miniature versions of your house gods and offering them up. Somehow both deeply religious and slightly adorable. Here you go, little god statue, have a mini-me muffin. While making the offering, the person would murmur prayers. These weren't necessarily long, elaborate speeches. They were simple entreaties for the well-being of the family, for prosperity, for protection during the day ahead. Please, Laras, keep the house safe today. Penates, ensure we have enough grain. Genius, guide my decisions in the forum. It was a way of asking for blessings and warding off misfortune before stepping out into the unpredictable world. This practice wasn't confined to the rich. Archaeological evidence shows Lararia in all sorts of dwellings, from grand villas in Pompeii to simple rooms in Rome itself. A poorer family might not have elaborate painted scenes or marble statues, but they could have rough terracotta figures, or just a designated corner where simple offerings were made. The act of acknowledging the household gods was more important than the grandeur of the shrine. Mainstream fact: household worship at a lararium, dedicated to protective spirits like the Laras and Penates, was a common daily practice for Roman families. The morning was a particularly important time for this ritual, marking the beginning of the day's activities and the departure from the safety of the home. It was a moment to reconnect with the spiritual forces that protected your private sphere before venturing out into the very public world of the city. It grounded you, reminded you of your family's history and future, and hopefully gave you a sense of divine favor for the tasks ahead. Historians still argue about the relative importance of public versus private religion in Roman daily life. While the grand temples and state-sponsored cults were politically and socially significant, were these personal, daily household rituals truly the heart of most Romans' religious beliefs and practices? Or were they more of a cultural tradition followed out of habit and social expectation? The intimate nature of household worship makes it harder for us to fully understand the depth of personal piety involved, relying largely on archaeological finds and brief mentions in literature. So, before you finally leave your home and fully immerse yourself in the Roman hustle and bustle, take a moment in front of your simple shrine. Light a tiny bit of incense, whisper a prayer for your family's safety and prosperity, maybe offer a crumb of bread. It's a quiet, ancient moment connecting you to millennia of Roman households doing the exact same thing as the sun rose over the city. With your gods appeased, or at least acknowledged, you are now spiritually prepared to face the day. Alright, you've done it. You've survived waking up on your rope bed, navigated the ancient bathroom situation, shared sponge? Anyone? Splashed some cold water on your face, and perhaps endured the oil and strigil, dealt with hair, barber, or ornatrix, choked down some bread and olives, potentially hosted or attended the salutatio, wrestled with your toga or adjusted your stola, braved the cacophony and smells of the street, maybe made a social pit stop at the public latrine, and even offered a quiet prayer at your lararium. You've started work or are on your way there. But sometimes, even in ancient Rome, the morning didn't go smoothly. What about those little health problems that crop up right as you're trying to start your day? Romans, like us, dealt with morning aches and pains, minor ailments, and just generally feeling under the weather. And their remedies were, well, they were Roman remedies. Forget popping an aspirin or grabbing some Pepto-Bismol. If you woke up with a headache, the recommended treatments varied wildly. You might be advised to wear a garland of specific herbs around your head, or perhaps apply a poultice of crushed plants to your forehead. Some remedies involved more esoteric ingredients or rituals. Remember, they didn't understand germ theory, so their medical practices were a mix of empirical observation, superstition, and what seems to us like pure weirdness. Upset stomach? Maybe something wasn't quite right with that overnight chamber pot situation, or perhaps that garlic cheese spread for breakfast wasn't the best idea. Roman remedies for digestive issues could involve various herbal infusions or potions. Some prescribed specific diets or avoidance of certain foods. Others might suggest things like consuming vinegar or other acidic liquids. The idea was often to balance the humors in the body, a concept inherited from Greek medicine. Joint aches or stiffness from that rope bed. You might apply warm compresses, use liniments made from oils and herbs, or try massage. Exercise was also recommended, but perhaps not first thing if you were feeling particularly stiff. Going to the public baths later in the day, with their warm pools and massage services, was a popular way to alleviate such issues, but that's an afternoon activity, not a morning fix. Colds and coughs were common, especially in winter. Remedies included inhaling steam from boiled herbs, drinking hot concoctions, or applying warming poultices to the chest. Some treatments involved animal parts or other ingredients that sound strange to us today. It was a lot of trial and error, passed down through tradition or from medical texts. Yes, Romans had medical writers, though their knowledge was limited by the science of the time. For more persistent issues, or if you were wealthy, you might consult a doctor medicus. Roman doctors came from various backgrounds. Many were Greek, and their training varied. Some were skilled, others were little more than quacks. Medical treatments could be invasive and painful, involving surgery without proper anesthesia, beyond perhaps opium or mandrake, or reliance on bleeding and purging. There was a quirky tidbit related to Roman medicine. They used spiderwebs to stop bleeding. Yes, they would apply cobwebs to wounds, believing it would help staunch the flow. It sounds horrific, but spider silk does have some natural hemostatic, blood clotting properties, so there might have been a tiny bit of accidental efficacy there, alongside a significant risk of infection, obviously. Not exactly a sterile bandage. Historians still argue about the overall effectiveness of Roman medicine and the quality of care the average Roman received. While they made significant advances in public health engineering, aqueducts, sewers, baths, individual medical treatment was often based on incorrect theories of the body and relied on potentially harmful remedies. Did more Romans die from their treatments than from their illnesses? It's a complex question with no easy answer, as diagnoses were often inaccurate anyway. So, if you woke up in ancient Rome feeling less than your best, your morning might involve trying some questionable home remedies or perhaps contemplating a visit to a medicus later in the day. It was a reminder that even without modern germs and pollution, life was physically challenging, and basic health problems were a constant factor. You just had to push through because the Roman day waited for no one, especially not for someone complaining about a headache caused by questionable remedies. You've dealt with potential morning maladies, performed your duties, and are now fully engaged in the rhythm of the Roman city. For many, the ultimate destination, the beating heart of Roman public life, was the Forum. Alright, you've made it through your entire Roman morning routine, from stirring on that less than luxurious bed to navigating the chaotic streets and dealing with whatever minor ailment you might have woken up with. You've perhaps finished your salutatio, opened your taberna, or arrived at your administrative post. And for many, the culmination of the morning's activity, the place where everything converged, was the Forum. The Forum Romanum, or Roman Forum, was the central public space in the city of Rome. It wasn't just one single square. It was a large, irregular area containing numerous important buildings, temples, basilicas, large public halls used for business and law, monuments, and open spaces. In the morning especially, the Forum was absolutely buzzing with life. Imagine arriving there after your commute. It's a vast, open area, paved with stone, surrounded by impressive architecture. Temples dedicated to important gods like Saturn or Concord stand alongside buildings housing the Senate, Curia, and the Rostra, the speaker's platform where orators addressed the crowds. Statues and triumphal arches celebrating emperors and military victories are everywhere. The morning was the prime time for official business, legal proceedings, and political activity in the Forum. Magistrates would be present, conducting official duties. Lawyers and advocates would be meeting with clients, perhaps some of those same clients who visited them for the salutatio earlier, and preparing for court cases held in the basilicas. Politicians would be giving speeches, trying to sway public opinion or gather support for upcoming elections. Imagine trying to hear a speech over the general din of the crowd. It required a strong voice or prime position. Financial and commercial transactions also happened in and around the Forum. Moneylenders had stalls, merchants sold goods, deals were struck, contracts were made. It was the city's main financial district. Think Wall Street meets Speaker's Corner meets your local courthouse, all outdoors in one vast, marble-filled space. People were there to see and be seen. Philosophers might be debating in porticos. Gossips were exchanging the latest rumors. Visitors from other parts of the empire or foreigners were gawking at the impressive buildings and the sheer spectacle of Roman power on display. There were street vendors selling snacks or trinkets, though perhaps fewer selling hot food right in the formal heart of the forum compared to the surrounding areas. Walking through the forum in the morning was an experience in itself. You'd be surrounded by people from all walks of life. Senators in their purple-bordered togas, ordinary citizens in plain togas, slaves running errands, soldiers, merchants, foreigners in different dress. The air would be filled with countless conversations, the sounds of activity, the echoes of footsteps on the stone. It was the embodiment of Rome's public life. Mainstream fact: the Roman Forum was the central hub of public life, serving as the main location for politics, law, business, and social interaction in the morning. Quirky tidbit: despite being the center of power and ceremony, people were still trying to sell things and gossip there. Human nature hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. Imagine someone trying to sell you a questionable amulet while a senator is giving a speech about the glory of Rome nearby. Multitasking at its finest. Historians still argue about how accessible the various parts of the forum were to the average Roman citizen and how much real political influence ordinary people had in this central space. While theoretically a public space, were certain areas dominated by the elite, or was it genuinely a place where different social classes mingled and interacted freely, within the confines of Roman social norms, of course? Was the forum primarily a stage for the powerful, or a genuine marketplace of ideas and commerce for everyone? By late morning, the sun would be getting higher, the heat starting to build, and the most intense period of work and public activity in the forum would begin to wind down. People would start thinking about their midday break and the much-anticipated main meal. The energy level wouldn't drop completely, but the peak intensity of the Roman morning, centered around this vibrant, crowded heart of the city, would begin to fade. You've done it. You've completed a simulated morning in ancient Rome. From the chill of the floor to the heat of the forum crowd, you've experienced the sights, sounds, smells, and rituals that shaped the first half of the Roman day. It was a world both alien and, in its basic human needs and desires, strangely familiar. A world of hard work, strict social rules, and surprisingly public bodily functions. Now, as the sounds of the forum begin to blend and soften, as the details of the cobblestones and the togas start to blur, the morning light is fading, becoming the gentle twilight of sleep. The crowds are thinning now. The noise of the forum is receding, like waves pulling back from the shore, the sounds of carts and voices becoming distant, almost a hum. You feel the weight of your Roman day, the long walk, the stiffness from the bed, the scent of olive oil lingering. The images soften. The vibrant colors of the market stalls dim. The stern faces of the statues relax. You are leaving the stone streets, the tall buildings, heading inward, towards quiet. The air is growing still. The energy of the city dissipating. You are drifting away from the noise, away from the light. The toga feels less heavy now. Your sandals feel lighter, almost floating. The sounds are fewer, softer. The distant murmur, like a lullaby. The journey is over. The day is done. All that activity, all that noise, just fading memories, letting go, completely sinking down into stillness, safe and quiet. Sleep. Now, just sleep.